Welcome to the Cloud Pod, where the forecast is always cloudy. We talk weekly about all things AWS, GCP, and Azure. We are your hosts,
Justin,
Jonathan,
Ryan,
and Peter.
Episode 85, recorded on September 2nd, 2020. The Cloud Pod plays Buzzword Bingo on machine learning. Hey, good evening, Ryan and Jonathan.
Hey Justin, how's it going?
Good. We had homework to do, and Peter bailed out before the show because he hadn't done his homework, I think. So
It's a long way to go to get out of doing the research. But
yeah,
I
said
applaud him, actually.
something about doing a flight or something, and I was just like, okay, sure. You didn't plan that one ahead, apparently. So.
I'm just jealous I didn't think of it.
Yeah, I know, but I think the homework was good. So as we talked about last week, we would go do homework to go read the "Dear Google Cloud, Your Deprecation Policy is Killing You" by Steve Yegg. This is a very long blog post, so I won't try to summarize all of it as I normally do for our articles, but I'll talk about it kind of at a high level, and then we'll kind of dive into some of this here. But first up, Steve Yegg, he was an engineer at Google in the early days. He was working there on software and leveraging Google's internal infrastructure for years. And he, comments in the thing that their infrastructure is amazing. He talked about at one point that he had been using Bigtable as part of his onboarding program, and that they had this, basically it was out of date, and so they basically contacted him. The dev team actually contacted him and said, "Hey, you're using an old version of our Bigtable solution, and that you need to move to a new version of it." And he looks at it and it hadn't been used for 2 years, zero traffic, and he still got a personalized note from a person at Google. And then basically he's left Google now and he's on to his own startup and doing his own thing. And he starts out with basically 13 years later, he gets similar letters as he did for that Bigtable letter from GCP about sunsetting important services you're using in August, and that you'll need to rewrite your application or it will break on a certain date, which he basically summarized down as F you, broken thing, F you. And so that's kind of the gist of the article. And he goes on to talk about a whole bunch of other stuff, which we'll get into here as we talk about it. But that's kind of the gist of it. And he basically makes a case of why Google's deprecation policy is basically killing user adoption. And I think it was really interesting. And I think you guys got some interest out of it as well. So what do you guys where do you want to start? Do you want to talk about his comparison to other platforms? Do you want to talk about the pretense of this? Where do you want to start?
I think you got to remember that it's not just typical cloud services that we're talking about in the context of the things that Google kills. I mean, think about Hangouts that they're going to kill, that you've got Google Plus. People invested a lot of time in social media and building their networks out only to have those things killed. We have Google Hire, where people use those services to track applicants to jobs, and all that information is going to be gone. It's not just cloud services. It's even deeper than that.
I'm still bitter about Google Reader.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a lot of people are. Yeah.
Google Wave. I miss Google Wave.
Oh yeah, Google Wave up there too. I think it's. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ryan.
So, for me, it was really. So I am prone to fall victim to the same. Well, why don't you just update? Why can't you just make that change if it's an API deprecation or if it's just a change? I also sort of fall into that same Google trap, and so what I got out of this article was really just a self-reflection a little bit that I got to be a little bit more conscientious of my users and not because his points about the things that are made to last and how the base OS levels and Emacs and the examples that he goes into for how to build a robust long-lived platform is really powerful, and it's really changed my mind in a lot of ways and how I approach building software and backwards compatibility. So this is it's a really great read. I recommend that everyone read it. But yeah, I mean, it's nice to to preach the perfect world of everyone can make updates and maintain their code and zero tech debt and everything, but it's just not the reality. And Google is not playing to that reality.
But think about the digital devices you own. What's the oldest digital device you own?
Probably my computer that's on my desk at home that I don't use very often.
and that can be updated fairly easily. It's not like it's a piece of standalone hardware which will break if a service that it depends on were to go away. I mean, you can update a computer.
Yeah, I mean, my TV. I mean, I have a TV that's been pretty. I've had that for 10 years almost.
Yeah.
There's things like that I just don't upgrade as often, but they're not upgradable. It's just there's nothing compelling to me to make me upgrade, and I think that's the interesting part of his some of his argument he's talking about when it comes to like new Emacs, which is wasn't the greatest selling point to me. not a huge Emacs fan. But he talked about how important backwards compatibility is to keeping that system alive and relevant for decades. And so the fact that even though I'm still running a TV that's 10 years old, it still supports 1080p. It doesn't support 4K, but all of my content gets downgraded to me. My cable box supports 1080p. It's very standardized. Eventually I'll get a 4K TV or an 8K TV. Might be my next upgrade at this point. But I still have the ability that I can watch content, and I can still watch content from 30 years ago from television. It's in terrible format, and I can't stand looking at it, but I can still watch it if I want to. So I think, the backwards compatibility argument he makes is super valuable and super important. And the other one he talks about is, he kind of talks about this pretense that Google doesn't understand platforms, which I think was actually the most interesting part of the article to me, because if you don't, if you think about platforms that they have, what platforms are they really using? There's Google Apps, which is really a platform-ish, and there's Android. And then he actually points out Android doesn't count because they bought it. And they've done a really good job keeping Android separate from the rest of the Google ecosystem. But if you think about these services as products, replacing a product like my TV is super simple. It's a transactional system that I'm going to replace it. I'm going to do that. And so if you treat all these things like a transactional system or something as a product, then the backwards need is not as important. And the deprecation just means, hey, it's no longer valid. It's old. You should buy the new one. You should buy the new Nest Home Theater or Home Thermostat. You should buy the next Google Mini box round obsolete thing. Whatever it's going to be. But when you're building a platform that you want other people to build on, the need for that thing to be able to support content long term and the ability to support upgrades and not be a nuisance to your customer is really important.
Yeah, think about those security cameras. They were writing images to S3. If S3 made a breaking change to the API, all those cameras, which may well still be in use because they're designed to last 10 years, all of a sudden they don't work anymore. But at the same time, I kind of agree somewhat with planned obsolescence. I think people can't have it both ways. I mean, you want the march of technology to make things better. Are we still using floppy disks or zip disks? Are we still saving data on tape? No, not so much.
But
well,
are we doing that because they're obsolete now, or are we doing that because there are better options? And so, I think that's the big difference. If I could probably go find my old Jazz drive, which I have.
Oh, you do? Box. I have discs. Yeah. I need to visit.
And I bet you, with enough adapters, I could go read data off that thing. That's sort of. But the planned obsolescence means that just wouldn't work. No matter what. So to use the TV metaphor, on a certain date, it would stop being able to display a picture. Is more. And I just don't know if I can believe in that as much as I used to.
Well, and I think this is the argument I make to, because we run internal services all the time. We run platforms. And my point is, if we're going to load a new version of it, there has to be something what's the juice? If I take this thing and I squeeze it, what am I getting out of it? What's the value prop to my end user to make them want to take the change? And if that is compelling enough, and I think the answer with the Jazz drive to CD-ROM and then to DVD-ROM is that it's easier, it's faster, they're less prone to breaking. They had a value prop that made them superior to the technology that existed at the point in time. And I think in the case of these areas where he's talking about being deprecated, these are not areas where they're making massive improvements. It's just, we decided we don't want to use that API anymore. We're going to give you a different one, and now we're going to force you to use the new one versus giving you the option of both. And I think that's where his argument really kind of comes into play, as he's saying, if I get this every month, there's only going to be a few times where you can do that to me where I'm going to start saying, okay, this is ridiculous. I'm not getting any value for making this change. And he talks about it when he was at Google, that they had tools to help you do this. So they actually gave you the tools to say, hey, you're relying on this old deprecated API. We're going to automatically update you to the new version. Google doesn't make those tools available to their GCP customers today. And maybe that's part of the message here is they need to think about how do they deprecate these things in a better way to make it easier for enterprises to adopt. But even then, we laugh at Amazon doing SFTP support and all the dumbness around FTP and FTPS support. And we're like, just rewrite your application. And the reality is some of these applications are so old. And when you're talking about the cloud and you're trying to go after the enterprise customer, they have old stuff that's not going to be fixed. They don't have the source code for. They just don't have a way. And if your pretense is you're never going to get out of your private cloud, then that's fine. But if you want them to move their workload, you have to meet them where they're at.
I mean, you realize how old some of the stuff that's still out there is when, there's a shortage of Cobalt, Cobalt developers earlier this year. You're just like, oh, okay, this is a much bigger problem than I thought. So I agree, yeah.
I think that's why you shouldn't call APIs directly. Why you should always have some kind of abstraction which you can swap out easily as the API, as the service changes, you swap out the middleman.
But the API is supposed to be that layer, right? Like that's supposed to be that exchange, and so you can call this API. And so the biggest difference he's arguing for is don't remove the API, add a new one. People will switch over, and just don't make any improvements to the existing one. You know, you label it as obsolete. You don't invest in it any longer, but it's still there. It'll still do the
Well, and the point that we always make fun of Simple DB. It's an Amazon service that's existed since almost the beginning of the cloud. They don't encourage you to use it. They don't recommend you use it. But if you're using it, you can still use it. It hasn't been deprecated. Now, Amazon has deprecated some things, but they're typically very much in a security reason, right? Like TLS certificates or bad authorization methods that are been vulnerable to attack, or they need to fix those. Those are the type where they're deprecating something and they're forcing that deprecation. I think the same thing happens in Java. Java warns you about stuff that's been deprecated all the time, but ultimately, unless it's a security related thing, they're not going to turn it off other than just warn you for. And that hasn't that continues to happen for a long time.
Yeah, but security is a good point. Now it's easy to say, oh, just don't do any more work on it, don't invest any more time in it, but you have to. You can't just let things completely rot away, because I'm sure there are other things that you depend on which are changing with time, and there's security vulnerabilities which will be found with time, and you'll have to keep going back. I mean, at what point do you say it's not worth my time or money to continue investing in maintaining this old thing?
I think
versus the cost to your customers, I guess. And Google's made their point clear, and I don't necessarily agree with it, but it comes down to money for sure.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there's a balance. I don't think there's a one size fits all answer. I do think that you can decrease the investment, and you deprecate things when there is a security vulnerability discovered. You can use that to take action. You still run it through your security programs, so still run it through that, but you make a minimal investment to keep that backwards compatible. I think that has a lot of worth.
I think the interesting part you talked about too, which was one of the most compelling, is that you're right. You could write a middle layer, Jonathan. You could write APIs are supposed to be kind of the middle layer. We talk about that a lot in cloud agnostic. I'm not going to write to the API specifically. I'm going to write to a middle layer that I now have to maintain and take care of as well. So someone's going to be deprecated somewhere. But the argument he makes around Python 2 to Python 3 in this article around the benefits of Python 3 didn't justify the means to get there, and so. It's taken years to get off of Python 2. Customers are still on Python 2. And if you're taking the lift to get from Python 2 to Python 3, why not just go to Go or Golang? Mm-hmm. And I think that's an interesting argument too, because the more that Google does this deprecation, the less and less likely they are to write to the APIs natively, and write that middle layer that Jonathan wants. And then it becomes, you don't have cloud lock-in anymore. You now have the ability to just move between clouds all the time and no big deal. So it is also a risk to their business in some ways, I would think. So his argument makes a lot of sense, not only from be good to your enterprises who are typically running enterprise software, but also, get that lock-in isn't bad necessarily for Google's long-term success if they want to be a serious player in cloud. And number two, if you do force the platform change, you're likely going to force them off to a different platform that isn't you. And that's a big risk.
The Python Go example hit home, because I didn't even realize I was doing it until I read this article, but a lot of stuff that we're porting it off of Python. We're just investing not in Python 3, but in Go. Exactly. It's got performance improvements. It's much more documented than when we created these things. It's growing in popularity, and so why not? There's no real reason to, but they made me move. They made me do a thing, so now I'm moving.
Yeah, and you looked at the market and you said, here's what else is out there.
Yeah.
And this is a superior option that people seem to like, and I can find developers who can do it. And, developers I want to go hire for Python still are predominantly Python 2 developers and not Python 3 developers, unless they're in machine learning, which is a whole different conversation.
We'll get to that later.
But, I do think it's really interesting, and it's just a lot of good questions and things to think about. And, and you think about, again, going back to your cloud provider and what do you want to do as you invest in a cloud provider, it makes me question why I would use Google. If I had to do these things, if I'm natively integrating, then that's an expensive layer I have to now invest in that I don't necessarily want to.
I'm going to pick on you for the Python example, though. So what do you think would have helped that situation for Python? Because I think forced obsolescence would have made people much earlier move to Python 3.
Would it though? I mean, you're talking about changing before it gains enough traction in the market to really have enough impact with forced obsolescence, and I don't know if that's really right tack, because the caution story here is that maybe you never gain that market share. But we're talking. I think what we're talking about is not a drastic change from what they did with Python 2 to Python 3. They could have made things a little bit more backward compatible to where the same code would work, and you're still offering improvements and adding more things as you move into 3 without the full deprecation. This just isn't going to work anymore. We're going to stop maintaining.
Well, they sort of did that with, importing module future, where I got Python 3 capabilities in Python 2, but could I have gotten to Python 3 in a much slower, here's the new API next to the old API in Python 2, you can take advantage of which one you want to take advantage of. There's ways they could have done that. I think it would have made it a more smooth transition, and it wouldn't have been so disruptive. Where the Python 2 to Python 3 is seen as a very disruptive interruption because of the way they changed large portions of the application.
I think that's exaggerated. I think it's only exaggerated because there's so much training material out there for Python 2.7 that it just frustrated people trying to run all those things, and they failed.
But it also speaks to the mentality, right? Like in the article, he talks about the maintainer of Python just saying, I named it Python 3000 because that's when people are going to, that's the year people are going to adopt it. It's a very callous approach to your users. I don't know if I support that, and I think that shows in the way it's deprecated. And I think that's what I tuned on myself, because that's how I could be to my users.
There's got to be some kind of fine line, or at least some kind of compromise between the movement of technology and supporting old versions.
Well, I think that's why we have API versioning. I think that's why we have that concept. I think you see Amazon doing a decent job of it today. I think you see Azure doing a decent job of it today, where they're providing, and they'll tell you it's going to, the other side of this is, it's one thing to tell them you're going to deprecate it in 6 months versus you're going to deprecate it in 3 years. And right. Google very often chooses the 6-month window. Like, oh, you have 6 months to make this conversion or you're out of luck. Where Amazon, when they do those things, they say, hey, we are going to deprecate it eventually. We highly encourage you to not use this.
I understand, but I found something similar. Do you want to know how long should 6-month-olds stay?
Nope. Google, go away.
Hasn't gone away by itself yet, apparently.
Yeah, he wants to join the podcast. Yeah. But anyways, I think that's the difference, is where you get this type of input onto the process of, is it 6 months deprecation or is it 2 years? And then in that 2-year window, you make the other side look more attractive and like, oh, the grass is greener on that side of the fence. I want to get there because I got these other amazing new features you didn't have available to me before.
I mean, just the when Amazon tried to deprecate the V3 of S3 API, like the amount of uproar and the immediate walk back, right? They were not willing to suffer through that and impose that on all of their users, and so they walked it back, and I think they extended the deadline by 2 years. I think that was their attempt at the Google Play, and I don't think it played out very well for them at all.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you're, this is part of the reason why HashiCorp doesn't want to make their Terraform and all these products 1.0, because they feel it gives them the right to break things right. Because they haven't locked down the API spec. They haven't locked down these things. And, having just done a Terraform upgrade to 0.13 this last week, I'm like, ugh, this is painful. You just did this to me on 0.12, and now you're doing it to me again in 0.13. Why? Why am I doing this? And you've changed like fundamental things about how you do references that I'm like, I don't understand why you made this change and why I'm being forced down this path. But I think there's always risk in that in software. And I think, it's maybe one of the reasons why I'll take a harder look at CDK now instead of Terraform and say, maybe I want to go that direction instead, because I'm tired of this breaking, because the CDK is coming from AWS. So that's a possibility that I make a change, because they've now proven to me twice they're going to break me in ways that I don't like. Well, again, if you haven't read this article, it is linked in the show notes. I highly recommend checking this one out. I think it's a really good article and really good conversation about how you think about services inside your organizations as well. It's not just, your GCP decision versus Azure or AWS, but also how you think about internal services versus products. And I think it's worth spending, about 20 minutes to read through this article and really get a lot of the details. We can't do justice to what Steve had to say, but I agree with almost every one of his points in this one.
Except Emacs. Can't abide by the Emacs.
I can't abide by that either. Well, he also said, people went to Golang or Ruby. I chuckled when I saw Ruby.
Oh,
wow.
wow.
No, they didn't.
No one.
I think that ship sailed. So. Well, moving on to our main show topics, off to AWS. So Amazon has, at reInvent, announced their first local zone in Los Angeles, causing massive confusion, as they already had like a localized region concept, which they forgot about. And this, even when they announced this, they said they will be adding a second local zone to Los Angeles. And due to popular customer demand, and they promised it, they have now launched the second LA zone. This is now known as US West 2 LAX 1A, or the LAX domain, as I'm going to call them, because it's
Nice.
LAX 1A and LAX 1B.
Yeah.
These are available for you if you are in the, if you have a need in Los Angeles, you have a data center there, you have some other need, you can take advantage of this for EC2, EBS, FSX, ELB, RDS, VPCs, all available to you in the LAX region. As well as if you're using Direct Connect via the Direct Connect gateway, you can probably get sub 1.5 milliseconds of latency between your LA-based data center and an AWS local zone. It sort of makes me wonder, though, if they just missed the opportunity to build another region there in LA, which might have been a better choice.
Yeah, it would change, it'd remove a lot of the specialness of the local zones as far as that ways that you have to create in your code to sort of look up these things. I wonder if this is like real estate is just that expensive, or is there like a single industry or a single customer that they're sort of catering to? Like, maybe it's the Hollywood industry requires, some low latency, something or other that they're allowing by building these things.
I wonder
Seems
if it's
like a weird choice.
Yeah, I can't imagine that Hollywood moving terabytes of data around for movies would be low latency would be the most important thing. But what about stuff like IoT and self-driving cars?
I definitely think there's use cases. And there's also lots of scientific research that happens in the Los Angeles area with USC and some of the other things down there. So there's definitely a value to it. But they only have 3 U.S. zones or regions. Sorry, 3 U.S. regions. You look at Google, you look at Asia, they're adding a lot of U.S. regions, and I don't know why. Oregon's kind of far from L.A., so I wouldn't have minded an L.A. region. I guess that's why they have West 1 in Santa Clara or San Jose or wherever it is. But that region's always been a redheaded stepchild.
Sure. Yeah, and what they're calling US West 2 is so huge at this point. Like it's it's just ginormous. It is a region in itself. So it's an interesting choice there.
Well, it's sort of like the same they're doing with the 5G zones, right? They're attached to these big master zones too, either in Virginia right now or eventually in Oregon. So it's sort of the same idea where they kind of are doing all these sub zones or sub components off of these major zones or regions. And then you also have, if you're doing outposts, those become attached to one of these regions as well. And so they've already built the infrastructure to do it. I see why they're making the play, but it doesn't. There's still value in having full blown regions. Well, if you've ever had the need to attach a Linux box to Active Directory, this is a scripting nightmare, which involves secrets and all kinds of fun things. And Amazon is making that much simpler for you now with a new ability to automatically join a Linux EC2 instance to an AWS Directory service for MS Active Directory seamlessly. This leverages the Secrets Manager, IAM, and SSM agent to handle the joining of the process. And it's simple as attaching a specific joining domain role to the account, and an SSM document will handle all of the magic of adding them to the domain. Now, of course, they don't support removing them from the domain automatically. You still would need to use a lifecycle hook for that, which no one does. But there you go.
But you can. Yeah. No, I like that when they make things easy. I wish that they would make things easy with full consideration of the life cycle. It's just it shows to me that people are joining these things to domains do not have the same expectations of maintaining a herd of these things versus a pet of the thing. So it's a shame they missed that, but I also think that making half of this easy is a good advantage.
Well, and we can give them feedback, and they'll add that next. So they'll add some capabilities, and I think that's because this is their version of MS Active Directory, they could do a lot more automation in AD than they offer today. So there's things they could be doing to make that service more robust, and tie it directly into Amazon and say, oh hey, that node has been terminated, I don't need to have that anymore, and you can have some lifecycle tied to that. So hopefully that'll be something they will do sometime in the future.
Agreed. I don't know if it goes in your model of killing AD though. So.
No, it doesn't go in my model of killing AD, but no one has jumped on the bandwagon of killing AD yet. Which someday they'll get there. They're just not there yet. Well, the next announcement, I didn't really know why you wanted this, but Rav53 has launched a new feature called Rav53 Resolver Query Logs, which lets you log all the DNS queries made by resources within your VPC. Customers use these query logs to be compliant with regulators, apparently, because that's a regulation that makes no sense to me. Others wish to monitor DNS query behavior to identify anomalies, which is a security concern. I sort of get that. And then others simply just wanted to troubleshoot distributed applications, which, that is a pain, and I kind of see that one a little bit. You can take those DNS query logs and you can send them directly to CloudWatch Logs. You can send them to S3, or you send them to Kinesis Data Firehose. But, the person who we should ask about why they wanted this feature is Jonathan Baker. Because apparently this is a feature request that he made, I don't know how many years ago, to AWS that he wanted this ability. So, Jonathan, why do you think this is important? Oh, but he's talking on mute.
Perfect.
And that's all I have to say. Mostly for debugging, honestly. But I without the ability to do packet captures and decrypt SSL, because we didn't want to have to force trusted root certificates and things, it would have been a really easy way of finding out which zones, which domains instances were hitting as far as web traffic goes. And so correlating DNS lookups with outbound traffic would make it pretty easy to spot people making connections to places not supposed to.
I mean, I guess it's a nice way to say, hey, the DNS is broken. I'm like, nope, I have a query log for you. I can see I returned the proper value to you in the query. I sort of would like to see this maybe on, not on all the time because it'd be expensive, but I kind of like to see it on external Route 53 resolver sometimes too.
It's there first. It already existed there.
Oh, it did already exist there? Okay,
yep.
Cool. Nice. So I could turn that on. I can see what DNS queries I'm returning back to, certain users, and if I'm routing properly by geo basis, which is nice. So that's good.
Yeah, and I use that right now to turn on some resources in AWS. I hit the DNS, triggers a little job, powers up an instance, and then hit it again. 30 seconds later, log in.
I guess you could do the same thing with your internal query log too.
Yep.
So
you could do the same thing, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a very Rube Goldberg way of turning on a machine.
I love it, but it's like
it sort of reminds me of
amazing.
SSH knocking, though. It's like SSH knock. I want to knock on this port, and you're going to return back to me on a tunnel back to another port. Yeah, same idea. Oh, good. Well, I'm glad to have this feature for you. Did you get a plaque or anything?
I didn't.
Commemorate the fact that your feeture request got made into a product. There should be plaques. We should maybe create a web service that just says I requested this feature, and now I have a printout.
Yeah, we should do that.
Should be a picture of a skeleton with holding,
It must be an ongoing problem with people who've made feature requests that it takes 18 months to 2 years to get any of these feature requests realized, by which time you've either found another solution or completely forgotten what the problem was in the first place.
Yeah, so we recently got a printout of all of the feature requests we'd made because we were demanding it. And I was reading through it and I was like, yeah, I don't remember why we asked for that.
Yeah. Were we drinking?
And you can kind of tell because it tells you the status of like not even under consideration. I'm like, yeah, because we don't understand why it's under why we even asked for it at this point.
But some of the really abstract ones really get picked up on. The teams reach out to you like, we'd really like to talk to you about why you want this feature, and you think, why?
Yeah, it is pretty funny.
Yeah,
because I was angry. It was 3 a.m. and it didn't work.
There was a GM we talked to not that long ago about a service that they want to potentially offer, and we walked them through our use case, and they're like, wow, you're really aligned to what we want to do. And I'm just like, yeah, because we've been thinking about this for 3 years when we asked for it 3 years ago. And now you guys are finally thinking about actually building. Like, I already designed the service for you. I already know how all of your stuff works. Like this is how it should do it. And they're like, yeah, that's actually what we're kind of thinking about doing. I'm like, so weird. Yeah. It's just...
it's almost like we met with the product team every year to discuss when this was going to happen.
Yeah, and we kept getting told, oh, it's on our roadmap. It's on our roadmap. Nothing ever happens. And you're like, okay, it's never going to happen. And then they finally reach out and like, hey, we want to talk to you about it. And we're like, what?
Yeah.
Well, for another feature that we sort of wanted when CoreOS got bought, Amazon is finally releasing the Bottle Rocket Linux distribution as now generally available. This is a purpose-built Linux distro to run containers. Bottle Rocket is designed to improve security and operations of your containerized infrastructure. It is built with built-in security hardening, helps simplify security compliance, and its transactional updates mechanism enables the use of container orchestrators to automate OS updates and decrease operational costs. Which is really kind of cool because it's really just a kernel, and if you actually want to admin the kernel, you actually have to attach a container to it. It's kind of neat. It does use the device mapper's Verity targets, which is a Linux kernel to provide integrity checking to help prevent attackers from persisting threats to the disk or the OS, as well as it supports the eBPF, which we talked about last week for Google, as they announced support for that as well. BottleRocket is apparently written heavily in Rust, and so if you are looking to contribute to this, you can do so if you know Rust and want to contribute to the open source roadmap. It is available as open source, and it does have a public roadmap available in this one as well. There you go. BottleRocket, what do you think?
As a guy who just pivoted his internal container platform to not this, I'm really sort of wishing the timing had worked out a little better. But we were a little bit too far in development when they announced the preview of this, and then I'd already sold the security and compliance team on the magical, wonderful new platform, and so completely pivoting away from that, I think, would have been detrimental to my health. So,
well, I don't know how you would have gotten all those security tools running containers either.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't think they would have given that to me a second time like I did with CoreOS. But yeah. So I mean, I've installed this on my local lab setup, and it's really a joy to set up and makes me feel like secure. And it goes back to the original things, all the things that attracted me to CoreOS in the beginning, and I just don't have the warm fuzzies on the Red Hat sort of offerings of those things. The community just isn't the same, doesn't have the same sort of support. So I'm hoping to get there with BottleRocket. I'm excited.
It does kind of make me wonder what you do with Firecracker versus BottleRocket, and when you should be using one or the other. I mean, I get the idea of micro VMs, and I guess that's more for Lambda functions, but everything's kind of turning into a container these days. So which way do you go?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's just layers, right? Different layers. So Firecracker is more of that, isolation with the micro VM construct, where you can now attach specific device drivers and have total isolation of user space, versus this just being a straight OS, right? So you can run BottleRocket on a Firecracker, system. And so this is, it just depends on, where you need the isolation. If you need to turn all the knobs to 11 for security purposes, and, it depends on your workload. If you're going to offer something multi-tenant, Firecracker is definitely needed. If you don't really have the multi-tenant, then you just want to make sure that you're running something that's resistant to attack, then BottleRocket's where you need to be.
Hey everyone, Jonathan here. I just wanted to take a minute to thank the cloud consulting gurus at Foghorn for helping make the CloudPod possible. These folks truly get it. Cloud consulting experts since 2008, they are premier tier partners with AWS, Google Cloud Platform Silver, and Microsoft Azure partners. From multi-cloud to containers to moving full production workloads to the cloud under the tightest compliance, Foghorn's team of full-stack cloud engineers have been there, done that, gotten the t-shirt, and are ready to share their experience with you. If you're in the market for some talent to supplement your team, visit www.fogops.io/thecloudpod. www.fogops.io/thecloudpod. Foghorn, the promise of cloud delivered.
AWS has announced a feature that seems so boring, so benign on the surface that many will overlook this. But you can now initiate internet key exchange negotiations for your VPN connections from AWS. This is available for new and existing site-to-site VPNs and can be accessed through the AWS Manager Console, the CDK, or the Amazon command line. Now, as I mentioned, this seems like a really boring announcement, but I will tell you what this enables, and I think you'll be excited just as I am. So if you're a service provider who provides VPN connectivity to your service, the only way for you to actually validate that the tunnel is up is to have a coordinated call with a customer, which is awful. So now you don't have to have a call with the customer on the other end of the line saying, hey, we've set up the VPN tunnel. Would you please send traffic to it so we can actually validate that it works and do a two-way handshake phone call to set up your VPN tunnels, which is super nice. That's the first one. The second one is that this will allow you to connect to other cloud providers. Because you know what? Who also does not allow inbound base initiated IKE exchanges? Azure. So if you wanted to have your Azure cloud and your Google Cloud and your AWS cloud all VPN'd up together, you couldn't do it. So if you wanted to use, Power BI tools on Azure from your AWS system, it was not possible. Now it is with this capability, which means that multi-cloud may be something that Amazon won't keep swearing off as the enemy of the people. And then the other side of it is if your VPN goes down, Amazon can actually try to reestablish your connection, which happens sometimes because Junipers and Cisco firewalls and those are kind of dumb, and they get stuck. And if someone had tried to knock the door on the Amazon on the Juniper, it would have reestablished. But because no one asked them to, they just sat there waiting for nothing. And so now AWS can do it for you, which is great. And so I am super happy with this one. I think it might open the door to some interesting use cases in the future.
This has got to be one of the feature requests that goes back the farthest.
Oh, for
Has
sure.
to be. I mean, I wonder, like, there's either we've bored our entire audience, except for, like, the 3 other guys besides us who have, set up the Rube Goldberg of EC2 Open Swan server to connect to my Amazon VPN doing a thing, like, in order to connect things. But or this is going to be amazing for everyone. I just don't know. I haven't decided which, but I know that because I have done all that horrible Rube Goldberg nonsense, I am super excited about this.
Yeah, that's bringing back some scary memories. And you try and do it multi-AZ and you realize that the return traffic doesn't come back the same path and the statefulness just drops everything. It's a complete nightmare. Yep.
I'll just scale this box vertically. We'll be okay. Yeah.
Well, the other feature that someone's asking for is the ability to send up to 2 gigabits of payload in an SNS message. And this is now available to you, as SNS has now launched an open source extended client library for Java that enables you to publish and deliver messages that payloads up to 2 gigabytes. Previously, you could only send 256 KB. Now you can do much more than that. With the extended client library, you can store the message payloads larger than 256 terabytes in an S3 bucket and use SNS to publish and deliver a reference to the payload location. Large payloads are billed as one SNS request and one S3 request, with billing for the payload based on the amount of data stored in S3. Both SNS and SQS support this extended client library, which rely on the AWS payload offloading library to store and retrieve message payloads to S3. So this is now built in for you. As Ryan pointed out to me earlier, this is something people already did before.
Yeah, so technically when I asked for this feature request, I wanted 5 gigabytes. But, no, I'm just kidding. Yeah, no, I mean, this is, this, if you exceeded the message size, the tried and true practice has always been just, pointer to S3. So you store whatever you want and just pull it out with some other things. So this is just an optimization of a process that people are already doing. And I think that great. They've made it easier. I don't have to do it's some extra dancing. And if I can fit within that 2 gigabits, great.
I wonder how transparent it is. Do you have to set up the bucket in advance and sort of tell it where to go and put the objects, or can you just use the library and it goes and does that stuff dynamically? Because I would like to have seen it be a much more transparent implementation.
Yeah, I'm hoping that it's completely transparent, like the CloudFormation, sort of it creates that bucket for you and puts your template in that bucket automatically. So you're right. If it's not that transparent, then yeah, throw it away. I don't care. If I have to create all that stuff anyway, nah.
So I do think you had to set the bucket name. At least looking at the code here really quickly as you guys were talking about it. It does say specify your bucket name for the extended clients. And then you can give it a topic name and a queue name and all those different things and a region you want it to be in. So it sounds like after you specify those things, it'll take care of it from there.
And then you've got to give SNS permission to write to the bucket. And
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, it is just a Java construct, so I mean, it's not magic. So I assume this will come to other languages we'll talk about here on the show in the lightning round in the future, like Golang and Python and others, because I could see them getting the same capability, and that Java has it for both SNS and SQS. The next one up is Amazon CloudWatch logs are now available to you inside the Amazon Toolkit for Visual Studio Code. This allows you to interact directly with CloudWatch log groups in the AWS region that are available to the active credential profile. After listing and filtering the CloudWatch log streams for such a log group, they can view a stream's most recent 10,000 lines or a megabit of log data with the option of loading older data or a newer event that occurred after the initial loading, as well as you can copy the log directly to your local disk so you can save it. So I actually think this is really cool. I could definitely see the advantage of not having to go to the console and, again, be where your developers are, which is in Visual Studio Code, or your ops people like myself. We live in Visual Studio Code all the time, and I'd love to be able to see a log right there when I need it.
yeah, it's cool. I think it's something that a lot of people have already written to tailor CloudWatch log locally while they're doing testing. So having it built into VS Code is awesome.
Yeah.
I always just wonder where the madness stops. But, at what point am I just replacing the browser with my IDE? But, I do think that, context switching has a real cost. This is one more way to avoid that.
I mean, technically you could do that today because you can run links in a command line, which then you could have a command line embedded in your IDE. You could just links the web. You could do it today.
I'm sure you could do it with Emacs.
Knock yourself out, Jonathan. Knock yourself out. Let me know how that
Look
goes.
forward
Okay?
to a future Jonathan does a thing.
And then tell me how all the JavaScript in the world doesn't work and how nothing renders properly in a text window. Because the
You have
days
to
of
keep
being able to really
the
use
Slack room up to date with your swearing.
Yeah. Well, if you were ever curious about guard duty and how guard duty compared to network intrusion detection systems, AWS has it your back because they have now paid for Genix to compare AWS guard duty with network intrusion detection systems available on the market. For Genix, for you guys who don't know, is a PCI auditor company. They come in and do PCI audits for companies who are spending lots of money on credit card processing fees and all those kind of great things. So GuardDuty, of course, is a cloud-centric IDS service that uses AWS data sources to detect a broad range of threat behaviors. And a traditional IDS relies on monitoring network traffic at specific network traffic control points like firewalls and host network interfaces. That allows the IDS to use a set of preconfigured rules to examine incoming data packet information and identify patterns that closely align with network attack types that are known, by the way, that are known. IDS solutions have a couple of problems in the cloud. The first one is that networks are virtualized because they're all VPCs. And then data traffic control points are very difficult to use, which is why they're giving you things like full packet copying, which is a whole different challenge. This makes it difficult or impossible to monitor all network traffic for analysis because you can't tap it. And then as well as cloud apps are dynamic. They have features like auto-scaling and load balancing and cloud-native things that change how a network environment is configured as demand fluctuates. AWS asked for Genix to conduct a test that compared GuardDuty to market-leading IDS to see if it was good or better. And for Genix determines that the GuardDuty is at least as effective at detecting network-level attacks as other market-leading IDS solutions. And because it has access to DNS requests, VPC flow logs, and CloudTrail events, they believe it can identify threats that no other IDS can detect on the market today. So there you go.
Ding, ding, ding. Finally, they realized why they needed that private DNS log.
Yeah, the
exactly.
Route 53. Yeah, exactly. I think I see this as the beginning of a sea change in security tooling and how we evidence intrusion detection, and I think that the new capabilities are going to be more holistic and view environments more holistically than we've typically done with viewing the network layer and only the network layer. So I look forward to this. I cannot wait to have this discussion with auditors because it's going to. I say that half tongue in cheek, but not quite. Because there is a certain tool set that security folks and auditors are more familiar with, and so but driving change here is going to be fantastic.
We need to become the new auditors, and then we can sell our own services to people who trust us to understand what's going on.
I don't know. I like auditors. I don't know that I want to go in and judge other people's architectures all the time unless I can fix it. And number two, I don't know that I have the patience to read all the controls and to justify and understand all these things. But I do think there's a point where you need to separate the auditing function from the technical knowledge function. And so I do see there's a need for, kind of like a pre-sale solutions architect who understands technology to be with the auditors so that when, a technical person is explaining how they're using all these controls to mitigate something, that someone can actually understand what they're saying. Because you can buzzword an auditor pretty quickly if if you're the wrong auditor. No, hopefully they're a good auditor, and I've had good auditors too, are smart enough and they will question stuff and they'll ask you the right questions and you can tell they get it or they don't get it. And I always like those auditors better because their feedback and their inputs are actually really valid and have valuable input to our processes, which I really like.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Well, and our final Amazon story is going to be a quick one for us because it's about IoT. And other than my Google Home that decided to yell at me, my IoT experience is very limited, and this light bulb that I can turn on and off to my left by telling it to do so. But AWS is reducing the price of IoT events by at least 86%. IoT events are a fully managed service that makes it easy to detect and respond to changes indicated by IoT sensors and applications. For example, you can use an AWS IoT event to detect a malfunctioning machine, or a stuck conveyor belt, or maybe an escalator that's not working, maybe, or a slowdown in production output. And with AWS IoT events, you pay for each message evaluated to determine the state of your equipment or process. So those messages that you're sending to evaluate that state are now 86% cheaper to process.
But that light bulb you have right there, is that the one that changes color depending on the severity of the alerts that come in?
It might. Just have one, it's going red.
Yeah.
I'm going to make one of those War Games DEFCON 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 signs to put in the office when we go back.
Yeah. No, that's great. We totally.
Yeah, I have on
totally
my list of projects to do one day is to get a Raspberry Pi and then get a map of the Bay Area, and then I'll basically have light diodes that'll basically light up depending on where I'm at, and if I'm, kind of like the Harry Potter, where are they at, danger clock.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
I'm gonna build something kind of like that. I think it'd be fun.
The Marauders map, right? Yeah.
And the Marauders map is the one they have in the castle, but this is the one that's in the Weasley's home. It's a clock, and it basically, if one of the Weasleys is in danger, it tells her that, and so she knows. Or if they're on their way back from the office, it's kind of cool. Anyway,
I like it.
We know what Justin's been doing while he's been stuck at home.
Yeah.
Actually, I have a comment on that later. Well, so we've reached the week of GCP Next that I dreaded the most because it is the MLAI week, which means that it is full of buzzwords that I don't understand. I don't pretend I understand. And I have a slew of announcements that we're going to go through that I don't know that any of us can really do proper justice to. So I apologize to all of our MLAI practitioners who listen to our show. You already knew that we're not the best at this because you probably laugh at us all the time, but we're going to do our best to get through these stories. And I'm sure if this matters to you, you'll care. And so for those people out there, I hope you enjoy. So the first one up is Google is making TabNet available as a built-in algorithm on Google Cloud AI platform, creating an integrated tool chain that makes it easier to run training jobs on your data without writing any code. TabNet combines the best of two worlds. It's explainable, or similar to a tree-based model, while benefiting from high performance, similar to a deep neural network. This makes it great for retailers, finance, and insurance industry applications such as predicting credit scores, fraud detection, and forecasting. TabNet uses a machine learning technique called sequential attention to select which model features to reason from at each step in the model. In summary, Google TabNet is a built-in algorithm that makes it easy to build machine learning models. There you go. That's all I got for you.
Yeah. It's really funny because I did all of these articles. I struggled to read through it, and it really just highlights how deep and immersive these fields are getting. They're basically technologies upon themselves, just how they build these models and their algorithms that they use. It's crazy, and I am quickly getting out of my league, and even being able to speak the same language as some of these data scientists. It's embarrassing.
Well, you're not a data scientist, and nor am I, and nor's Justin. I mean, it's a whole field of study in itself. So I don't feel too bad about it, as long as I know how to call the APIs if I need to. That's about my limit.
I mean, I don't expect you to know how a heart works, Ryan, because you're not a cardiologist. I mean, MLAI is its own thing, in my opinion. And it's an awesome thing, and there are things that you can pick up as a system admin, system engineer, kind of going into that space. But I think if you're really hardcore data science stuff is always going to be over us because we haven't gone to training for it. We haven't gone to school. We don't have the right experience with it yet. But, if it's something you're interested and passionate about, I'm sure there's training available.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that the cloud providers know that people don't have the expertise to know how to choose the best solutions, which is why we have things like SageMaker and whatever Google's offering is, which basically does the same thing.
I believe it's called the Google Cloud AI platform.
Just rolls off the tongue there.
Yeah, just rolls right off.
Can't believe that didn't stick in your memory.
Yeah. So this one I know a little bit about, and this is because it's around data analytics, particularly around ETLs and ELT pipelines to derive meaningful insights from data. Data engineers and ETL developers are often required to build dozens of interdependent pipelines as part of their data platforms, but orchestrating, managing, and monitoring all these pipelines can be quite challenging. And so Google is giving you the ability to orchestrate and manage your data fusion pipelines in Cloud Composer using a rich set of cloud data fusion operators. So someone out there is super excited about this.
Cool.
And having done complicated ETLs and batch job coordination, it is a pain. So it's nice to have a tool. I can see this value of this one. And then I was able to slip in a non-big data ML story here for you guys. With MySQL 8, it's ready for enterprise with Cloud SQL. They've expanded the Cloud SQL fully managed database service to now include MySQL 8. This joins MySQL pre-8, SQL Server, Oracle, etc. And MySQL 8, of course, brings the many powerful features such as instant DDL statements, atomic DDL, privilege collection using roles, Windows functions, and extended JSON syntax to help you be more productive. MySQL 8 supports HA, allowing you to ensure database workloads are automatically fault tolerant in the event of an instance level problem or even a zone outage on top of Google, which is kind of nice actually from it's multi-region aware across multiple regions if you want it to be, which is pretty kind of nice.
Yeah, but the ability to roll back changes at the data layer is really important as you go into multi-master clusters and things like that, because you realize that you've made a column change on one table somewhere and then there's a failure. There's never been a rollback strategy for that, so this is actually a really, really important improvement. I learned the hard way from Postgres. Trying to do multi-master with Postgres, it's just you had to have a whole separate process for upgrading the schemas everywhere.
And then one last thing. So ML ops, which is the closest that Ryan or Jonathan and I probably get to data science, is of course a big thing. And so simplifying machine learning ops is a big deal for data scientists and ML engineers so that your business can realize the value of AI. This article from Google highlights existing features such as the AI platform pipelines for building and managing pipelines, and the ability to use TensorFlow, extended pre-built components, and templates, as well as it talks about a net new service called ML Metadata Management for the AI platform. The service lets AI teams track all of the important artifacts and experiments they run, providing a curated ledger of actions and detailed model lineage. This enables customers to determine model prevalence for any model trained on AI platform for debugging, audit, and collaboration. And by the end of the year, they will launch the feature store, which is for the AI platform, which will allow you to publish models and purchase or leverage open source models to help boost your productivity and reuse. So that's stuff I can understand.
Yeah, and this is a huge advantage because this is a big challenge in our day job as well. Like, how do we can write our algorithms and we can make our models and we can test it using data sets, but then how do we actually get that into the product? It's not exactly easy or cut and dry, and there's multiple ways to do it. And then how do you providing that environment for data science to work in? This is also an enabler towards that as well. This is great.
I also think being able to prove that a model does what it is supposed to do and is without bias is also really important going forward.
Yeah, especially with what we're learning now with inherent bias in current algorithms, for race and gender, like being able to move into where you can demonstrate that programmatically. Fantastic.
There was an article we didn't talk about here on the show, but I saw it's out there about responsible AI from Google's perspective, and they have a bunch of stuff about that. No features, so that's why I didn't cover it here in the show, but a lot of really interesting content, particularly around that, the biases and how they're trying to model that out. So definitely, if you're interested in that space, Google has a lot of people who are very passionate about it, which is great, and so they're very focused on trying to make responsible AI a thing. So definitely check that out if that's something of interest to you. That's it. We made it through ML and AI.
Cool.
And then we move on to Azure. So it's a different level here. First one is, of course, after AWS and Google have announced their amazing package managers for artifacts, Azure, who's always had one and said, hey, you guys are copying me, has realized that they both had a feature that they don't, which is the ability to support upstream sources for universal packages. And so Azure rushed to the market and bought that capability as well, and now they support upstream sources for universal packages available with the latest release of Azure Artifacts. This allows you to configure Azure Artifacts to feed automatically download universal packages from upstream sources on demand. So there you go. That's an Us 2 announcement if I've ever seen one.
It's a weird Us 2 though, because like we already had the artifact manager, but it didn't have that capability.
Suddenly,
so it's like
one feature
parity. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's like all of a sudden they beat us, and we had to get back into parity. Yeah.
So what does this replace? Is this kind of like the Red Hat Satellite kind of thing where you can
this is the Artifactory replacement.
Download the stage artifacts from somewhere else?
Not Satellite. Satellite's more of like how do you manage updates on a system, right? It's like a central coordinator for Yum. This is more, Artifactory or Nexus, Nexus. Sorry, wife's a lawyer.
Nessus? No, not Nessus either.
Yeah, Nexus Lexus, a law tool. So this is just, a repository.
Artifactory, Nexus, all that kind of stuff. So the other thing that Azure's done, of course, is their monthly cost management and billing updates. They have lots of new features for you if you're worried about your Azure spend, including the ability to schedule your exports of your usage data, hopefully to a machine learning model or something else, not a person, because I don't want those in my email box. More details for reservation recommendations of why they're recommending it, some quick fix recommendations, and several changes to the data in the Azure usage data exports, including bandwidth changes we previously talked about here on the show. So all those changes have now gone live, and your billing reports are broken. That is why. So fix those.
Yeah, it's painful, right? Billing, it's just very painful. But I love seeing it built into these services to help keep control of costs.
Yep, for sure. Well, this next announcement I was sort of intrigued by, but also kind of like, okay. So this is the ability for Azure to make it easier for you to create child zones, which are easily attached to parent zones in their DNS solution. Apparently, this was a direct ask from customers. And prior to this change, when a customer was creating a new child zone, they would add their resource records to the newly created zone, but often miss the step of adding the complicated name server records back to the parent zone. causing name resolution failure when the customer would try to actually test the newly created zone. So to fix that, they've updated their wizard to basically do that for you, which is really nice. If you're using this capability, it doesn't help you in infrastructure as code, so still do it the right way there. But if you are using parent-child domains and delegations, this is a great feature for you.
I mean, it's only complicated if you don't know how it works, right?
It's DNS. Does anyone know how it works anymore?
If I recall, Ryan, this was one of the first scripts that we wrote together
Yes,
about 3 or 4 years ago.
And we still use it actually.
Yeah.
EM delegate zone, like that is still in use today. Yeah, and it's only because it was nightmarish trying to organize this in the early days of our cloud platform, where it was like, why does the DNS work? Oh, we forgot the name server records again. Yeah.
or just people creating zones thinking they would just magically work, and that would be the next goal, I guess, would be to find people who've added zones and then sort of retroactively fix the name server records. But yeah,
that's actually that's a good idea for our platform. I might write that one down.
So, and Ryan, when we walked through the show notes earlier, was saying, well, Amazon doesn't do this. And I said, are you sure? Because that new wizard, that new GUI might do it. You don't know.
It could be buried in there somewhere. But
it could be buried. I'd have to go back. Yeah, I just keep switching back to the old console, so I can't.
If it was, it almost certainly wouldn't be cross-account.
Right. And that's
it would not be a cross-account.
And so Azure has that concept, built in. They don't have the same account structure, so it might be a little easier in that platform. No jealousy or anything there at all.
Well, hey, we're 3 years ahead of the next cloud provider for re-implementing the tool we wrote, so cool. It's how I measure my success in life.
I do like the way you look at it. I do like that. Yeah.
And then the last article from Azure made me chuckle, so I included it, which was 5 ways to optimize your backup costs with Azure Backup. Because everyone needs 5 ways. Saving money is, of course, important than ever, and backups might be a prime place to check, especially if you've misconfigured your policies. So the first one is to clean up the backups for your deleted resources. Now, on the surface, that sounds fine unless you took the backup so you could delete the instance. So if you do potentially need the data, don't just go delete all your unattached resource backups, because you might actually need those in the future. So be careful with that one. The next one, of course, is optimize your backup policies. Maybe a single snapshot hourly is better than one every minute, for example. Or what they really want you to do here is don't use their full backup and use their differential backup, because it's much easier to run a differential than it is to run a full, and you can save some time and some energy there, as long as you don't mind applying multiple differentials and fulls when you need to restore the data. So do keep that in mind. Optimize your retention with shorter retention durations for your backups, as long as you still meet your compliance requirements and that you don't actually need the backup from 3 weeks ago. So don't delete the backup you might actually need. Take advantage of selective disk backups, which means back up the data you actually care about, not the Windows directory. That's how I see that one. Mm-hmm. It's an important one. And then determine the appropriate required storage redundancy for your backup. So in the Azure world, you create a storage account, which you can make multi-region aware, globally replicated, or locally redundant. And so potentially, do you need your backups to be globally redundant? That's the question you should be asking yourself. Or is locally redundant enough, or is just too much redundancy in redundant worlds altogether? So again, this is available to you to save some money on Azure backups. There you go.
Reminds me of episode 75. The cloud pod deletes everything but keeps copies.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the reason why I said don't delete the copies if you actually need the data.
Yeah. Yeah, they really should have some protections in here, like do not delete before, make it sort of right once.
I kind of like the time deletion. Like you signal a delete and then it gives you 48 hours before it actually deletes it or whatever. I like those. So you at least it's you can fire off the automation to clean up and then sort of dead man switch it if you desperately need that. You're like, oh god, but there's no perfect pill in this case, I don't think.
All right. Well, Peter gave us enough notice that I was able to give us weekend update lightning round. So he let us know he was going to be blocked. So I have written out jokes once again that will either hit or miss terribly, and I apologize for all the bad ones in advance.
Prepare for laughter in 3, 2, 1.
All right. So I think the order today is Justin, Ryan, Jonathan, and we will see how this goes. It's been a while since we've done a weekend update lightning round. I don't know if Ryan's ever done one actually. So this would be.
I've done exactly one, or maybe 2. So yeah, I'm definitely the noob here.
It was about the time that we were experimenting with this format when you joined us full time. So it's possible you did do a couple, but I just don't remember. Because that was 100 years ago in COVID.
It
time.
was in 2020 time.
All right, let's do this. Azure has released the ability to run analytics against REST APIs, asking the question, how do I get logs for my logs?
In proof that it is not the cloud for me, Azure has released the ability for me to create a table with one click. Infrastructure code or death.
The Amazon Corretto team has released 15 as release candidate. They too have had too much coffee and just jittered right by Corretto 12, 13, and 14.
Yeah, where did those go? Like Java, it was Java 7 and then Java 6, Java 7, Java 8, but I don't remember any Java before that. And then all of a sudden it was 11 and now it's 15. I don't get that.
It's like Highlander 2. We don't talk about Highlander 2.
Exactly.
What happened to those Java versions?
Amazon RDS for SQL Server now supports Traceflag 692, a close cousin of Experiment 626, aka Stitch. And yes, I have been stuck in my home with too much Disney Plus since March.
Amazon RDS for SQL Server now supports SQL Server 2019. AWS continues to show their support for third-party products such as Kubernetes, SQL Server, and Kafka. The kind of support where you curse Amazon, you build it all in Terraform, launch it into production, stabilize it, and then have Amazon announce this. And now everyone will question why you built this instead of just using RDS. Thanks, Amazon.
Story of our lives. You can now use Amazon Textract with private links. Of course, nothing is private unless you told Amazon not to use your data to train their own models.
Zing! Yeah.
AWS Systems Manager now supports all current versions of Ubuntu. Of course, if you are a huge fan of Gentoo, you can get Bentu.
Nice. I love it. CloudFront announces real-time logs. So now I can see in real time that my CloudFront updates are taking an eternity. Come on. Is it done yet?
Without having to wait 10 minutes first. That's nice. Well, we have a couple things coming up that we want to share with our listeners. Of course, the first one is the Rust conference is coming up on September 15th. If we tickled your fancies with that talk about Bottle Rocket supporting Rust as its way to do things, maybe this is for you. This is a free conference put on by our partners at Manning. We are sponsoring the Rust conference as well as the next conference as well as our podcast sponsors for the show. So we were mentioning it here. There are some links to go sign up for it to give us credit that you heard about it here on the show. And so do follow those if you're interested in the Rust conference on September 15th. Or if that one doesn't work for you, we have the Women in Tech conference coming up on October 13th, which we're also sponsoring here at the Cloud Pod. So we are super excited for both of these conferences. Of course, Women in Tech is a big movement trying to get more women into the technical world. And so we can have them provide value to all of the amazing cloud technologies that we're building. So we do support Women in Tech a big way here at the show, and we do encourage you to join the conference, even if you're a man. That's a key thing, because I think a lot of times men see Women in Tech and go, that's not for me. If you're supporting the movement, you're supporting getting more people into coding and women in code, this is definitely a way to do that and support that process. And here, all the great ways that people are trying to do this and how you can help contribute to the community. So even if you are a male or a non-gender or whatever, you can go to Women in Tech and join that as well on October 13th. So do sign up for those. Follow the links in our show notes so we can get credit that we sent you there. But we are sponsoring and we are super excited about it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the Rust conference. It's something I've been wanting to kind of get into, but it's so difficult just to learn something in an abstract way. But some of the speakers they have on the 15th are going to talk you through some sort of real world scenarios and how you can use Rust to help with game development, how Rust helps you with sort of thread safety and memory safety. And I think Rust's probably going to be the future of a C. We shall see. Mark my words.
We will definitely see. Also, these are both free. I didn't mention that part. But both conferences are free to attend and are being streamed on Twitch, which makes it super easy to use. Well, that's it here in This Week in Cloud. Anything else you guys want to share with our audience?
I need to get out of this house, but other than that, no.
It's September. I don't know if you guys know that or not, but yeah, it's now September, and we're continuing to be stuck at home in a big way, which is a bit of a bummer. But hopefully soon enough, we'll be able to get out of our houses and back into the real world and see each other and go to a conference maybe someday. That'd be nice. All right, guys. Well, we'll see you next week here at the Cloud Pod. Good night.
See you.
Bye, everybody.
And that is The Week in Cloud. We'd like to thank our sponsor, Foghorn Consulting. Subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts and tweet us your feedback at #TheCloudPod. Or join our Slack channel. Go to our website, thecloudpod.net for sign-up instructions.